Hello, how are we doing today? Wow, that was like exciting. That's the best ever. Well, it's good to be here. My name is Ryan Hairston, and my wife and I live in Frisco, Texas, and Legacy Church has been a good friend to us. Jean, Tammy, Marcus, Lisa, they have been wonderful supporters and friends of my wife and I and our family in our life and in our ministry, and so it really is an honor and a privilege to be here today. So thank you for having me. I'm grateful to do it. My wife and I run a nonprofit here locally called Forge Dallas, and Forge Dallas really exists to help train everyday people to live as missionaries in their everyday places. So that's what we do. That's who we are. If you want more information about it, you can go onto the website or you can come find us if that's something that excites you or piques your interest. I'd love just to ask the Lord one more time just to bless our time together. So if you would mind just praying with me for just a quick second. God, I am grateful that we don't have to pray or ask that you would be with us. God, your presence fills the earth. It fills our workplaces. It fills our neighborhoods. It fills our towns and our cities. You are already at work in this place and in this world. God, your presence even fills this place this morning. So God, I pray that we would take a moment to pause, to ask that we would realize it and that we would see it, that we would hear it, and we would listen to it. God, I pray that you would bind the hands and the feet and the mouth of the enemy, that you would keep him from distracting us this morning, that we might hear from you. God, I'm desperate for it. I think we all are desperate for you to hear your voice. And God, I pray that this morning as we discuss and talk and share stories, God, I pray that you would be honored and glorified in it. God, I pray your spirit would speak. God, that you would be strong in my weakness. God, I pray that the things of Ryan, the things of man, will quickly fade from our ears. God, but the things that you speak to our hearts, the things that you say, God, I pray that they would last. They would be implanted deep within our hearts and our souls. That today would not just be a service, it would not just be another routine, but it would be a moment that we heard from you. God, that's what we ask. We want to be the people you've called us to be, and we need you in that. So God, thank you for today. Thank you for this beautiful congregation of folks, this faith family who love you and who want to follow after you. And so God, I pray that you would speak. And we ask these things in your name. Amen. Thank you. Well, I am excited to visit with you guys today and to share with you today. My hope is that this would be kind of more conversational in some ways, at least from my point. I'm not an expert. I don't claim to be an expert on mission or anything of that nature. Rather, I just try to be a practitioner. I just try to find where God's working and join him there. I miss it at times. At times I get it and he speaks to me and I join him in the midst of that. But you're not listening to an expert. This is just a fellow co-laborer on the journey with you guys. And so hopefully today will be inspirational to you. Hopefully today it'll give you some tangible tools as you seek to join God in mission and maybe the places you already live. I was texting this week with Marcus, and Marcus was sharing with me that a lot of you had just come back from a missions trip to New Orleans. Now, I'd love just a show of hands who was on that mission trip. So we got a big students, some adults, some parents. Perfect. And it sounds like you guys have a lot of missions kind of type of events that are coming up, which is really exciting. In fact, it's incredible to see a faith community engaging in mission around the world. And I think that's what we're called to do. But I think oftentimes, as we seek to go to the ends of the earth in mission, sometimes we skip over the end of the street. I really believe it. I was talking with a neighbor last night, and by the way, today's talk, or today's kind of dialogue, is about mission in the suburbs. We all live in the suburbs: Plano, Allen, Dallas, Richardson, Frisco, wherever you're at, McKinney. It's a suburb. And what does this look like? It's one thing to say we're going to go to New Orleans. It's one thing to say we're going to go to Haiti. It's one thing to say we're going to go wherever we're going to go around the country. But what does it look like here? What does it look like as I drive from this place into my neighborhood? Because I think if we neglect that, we neglect the very thing that God has called us to be and to do. I was talking with a neighbor last night. He and I and the kids, we went out to eat dinner. It was all the tacos you could eat on the border, so we went and engaged that without the spouses. We came back to the house feeling completely full, over the top, probably overdid it. I have already confessed my sin of eating too much last night. But we had a great time, and he came back, and the kids were playing upstairs, and he and I were sitting downstairs, and we were just visiting and chatting. And this is a neighbor of mine. We've been neighbors probably for almost coming up on 5 years. This neighbor is a dear friend. He's not yet a Christ follower. He is definitely on the journey, and he's definitely on the path, and he has a lot of value to bring to the table, but he's not yet a Christ follower. And we were sitting and we were talking, and I was sharing with him that I've got to get up tomorrow morning and that I'm coming to Legacy Church and I'm going to share with them. And we started dialoguing about what I was going to share about and what I was going to talk about in church in general. And these types of conversations, it's not a big deal. We're just sharing, we're just talking. And so in the midst of that, we were talking about the other folks in our neighborhood that are quote unquote, in his eyes, religious. People that attend a local church. Now, let me tell you, in our neighborhood, it's few and far between. We have a street of about 40 homes, and probably only 3 of those families are active in a local faith community. And so you think about the percentage of that. Now, that's not just my neighborhood, folks. That's the communities that we live in. I mean, we're not in this everybody gets up on Sunday morning and goes to church kind of world anymore. So we're going to have to begin to take a little bit of a different approach because, folks, they're not coming, right? All right, that's just a side note, okay? But we were talking about these few other families, and he said, Ryan, it's funny that these religious folk in our neighborhood, he says, I find that everybody in this neighborhood is fantastic. We've got a great neighborhood, he was talking about. He says, I love our neighborhood. It's the best neighborhood. It's like luck that we ended up here. Everybody's friends. We're all getting along. We go to the pool together. We hang out together. We share meals together. We live life together. Our kids play together. The adults hang out together. He says, this is a real community, but it's funny that the religious folk, these 2, 3, 4 families, they are the ones that are less involved and less interested in our neighborhood. He says, they never come to this stuff. They never hang out. They're really missing out on our neighborhood. And I couldn't help but agree with him. They're so caught up in their own lives. They're so caught up in their church world and in their church friends that they're missing out on the relationships that God has there for them in the very neighborhood that they live. And I can tell you, those people today is where I was 3 years ago. And it's only by the grace of God that I'm here today and that God has opened my eyes to see something different. 3 or 4 years ago, I was serving as a youth pastor at a local church. My wife was serving as the associate worship director, worship leader at a local church. We were on staff. We were engaged. And 3 years ago, I knew none of my neighbors. We had lived in the neighborhood. 3 years ago, we had lived in the neighborhood for 2 years. I didn't know any of them. I was so caught up in my church world. I was so caught up in my Christian friends. I was so caught up with the people that look and act and think just like me that I missed out on the folks in the places that God had already placed me, my neighborhood. I can honestly say that 3 years ago, I had no significant relationship with anyone that was not yet a Christ follower. Now, I had a few projects. I had a few people that I would invite to come to church with me, but I had no relationship. I had no friendships. Think about it. How many significant relationships do you have with people that are not yet Christ followers? People you would call friends. People that you would call comrades. People that you would say that you're sharing a life with. How many? Can you count them on one hand? Do you have more than that? I would also say 3 years ago, I knew no one in my neighborhood. I couldn't tell you to the house to the left, the house to the right, the house across the street. I couldn't tell you anything about them because I was not engaged. And let me tell you, 3 years ago, I had been in ministry for 10 years. I'd been a Christ follower for 14 years. And I still felt as if that life that God promised, this abundant life that God promised, I still felt that I was not getting it, that I was missing it. I would ask myself, this life that God promises, this abundant life, I'll be honest with you, I didn't have it. And then I began to realize that the reason that I wasn't experiencing the life that God promised was because I was not living out the life that God had called me to. You see, I think in the same way we go to the ends of the earth. And that is very important. We need to go to the end of the street. You see, Jesus, in John chapter 20, this is John's version of the Great Commandment. Matthew's is go and make disciples. I like that. But I think Matthew's is missing a little something. I like John's because John says in chapter 20, verse 21, Jesus says this. He is just resurrected. He's about to ascend. He's coming. He shows up to the disciples the first time they see him. And he says, now, in the same way the Father has sent me, so now I am sending you. And then he breathed the Holy Spirit upon them. You see, that wasn't just kind of a rally, a commission for the first disciples. That's ours as well. To where Jesus is looking at you in your eyes and saying, in the same way the Father has sent me, so now I am sending you. And you know what? I've already done it. You have already been sent. You are already in the place that God wants you. It may be your workplace, it may be your neighborhood, it may be your apartment complex, it may be wherever, it may be your local gym, it may be a group of people that you walk with or exercise with or hang out with, but God has sent you. And I think the most important question that we can ask as Christ followers is, to whom have we been sent? Do you know? Do you know the people group? Do you know the geographic location that God has sent you? Who is it? I would say it's got to start in our neighborhood. It's got to start in the place in which we live. Who is it? Do you know their names yet? But that is the place in which God has placed you. We are a sent people. The word mission comes from the word missio. And the word missio means sent ones. That we are a group of people joining God in his redemptive mission in this world. We are the sent ones. We are the sent people. And we are joining God. We're not extending the kingdom. We're not furthering the kingdom. We're not building the kingdom. The kingdom already exists. God's reign and rule is complete. And we have the opportunity to join him, to help people understand it, to help people see it, to help people experience it. That we can announce it and we can demonstrate it, that we can give foretaste for the kingdom to come in the places we work and play and live. But one place we cannot be sent to is the church. I'll oftentimes talk to pastors or church workers, and I'll ask the question, to whom have you been sent? And they're like, oh, that's an easy one. I've been sent to the church. Like, you can't be sent to the church. You are the church. We are the church. We cannot be sent to ourselves. We're meant to be salt to the unsalty, light to the darkness. And so we are to come alongside what God is already doing and begin to live out sent lives, because it makes no sense to the people we live next to if, in fact, we're not engaged with them. I'll never forget one of my other neighbors. I was having a conversation with him, and he was talking about another person that attends a faith community in our neighborhood, and he says, Ryan, it's so funny that I'm sure this guy, and he actually worked at another local faith community. He says, Ryan, I'm sure that the guy that lives here, all right, and works down here at the church, I'm sure that he's a good guy. Yeah, I'm sure he is. I'm sure of it. And I'm sure he goes to work at his local faith community, and I'm sure he does great things. I'm sure he's nice. I'm sure he's welcoming. I'm sure he's caring. I'm sure he's wonderful. I'm sure he's fine. I'm sure of all that. I don't doubt that. But I just got one question. He says, why is it that the guy who is all of those things here, he says, why is it that he's not all of those things here? He said, I thought that following Jesus thing meant like you're going to look like him in all areas of your life. Is there a disconnect? I love what one author says, and I want to read you a little quote here. And he says this. He says, incarnational mission, in other words, that looks like Jesus, means moving into the lives of those whom we believe we have been sent to. Living in one neighborhood, working in another, playing in another, and churching in yet another doesn't model to people that Jesus is willing to move into their neighborhoods. It says that if Jesus' followers don't want to live there, neither would Jesus. And I think it's time for us to embrace the people that God has called us to be, to join him in his mission, in his redemptive work, in demonstrating what heaven looks like. I heard one pastor say one time, he says, for so long we've been trying to get people into heaven that we forgot to get heaven to the places in which we live. And let that getting people into heaven thing come as a byproduct. We should take seriously, thy Father who art in heaven, may your kingdom come. May it be present here as it is in heaven. And we get to help with that. So, if in fact we are to be the people that God's called us to be, we've got to embrace who we are. We've got to embrace our sentness. We've got to embrace that you and I are not just missionaries around the world, but you and I are missionaries in our neighborhood. And that isn't boiled down to simply an invite to a faith community. That's shared life in the way that Jesus lived. I love, again, John chapter 20, 21, and the reason why I love it is because Jesus not only tells us to go, but he tells us the manner in which we are to go. Jesus says, in the same way, or just as the Father has sent me, so now I am sending you. In the same way in which Jesus showed up, in the same way in which he lived his 30 years in obscurity, in the same way that he lived and breathed and dwelt and hung out in a little town called the town of no goods, Nazareth, in the same way that he shared life with people in that community, in the same way in which he cared for people, in the same way in which he loved people, in the same way in which he included people, that is the way in which the Father is sending each one of you. So what does that look like? I'm going to give you 3 quick words to help you as you try to embrace your sentness. Sound good? All right, we all in there? All right, here we go. The first one is that if we're going to follow Jesus into mission, if we're going to join Jesus in his work in our neighborhood, because he's already there. We don't come here, get some good news, and then take it back out. Jesus is already out there. He's already doing his thing. And we don't bring it, we just come alongside what he is already doing. So the first thing that we've got to do, if we're going to follow Jesus into mission, if we're going to live out mission in our suburbs, is this, is that we have got to embrace proximity. We've got to embrace proximity. What do you think proximity means? What is proximity? Anybody, shout it out. Near. Close by. I love that in John chapter 1, verse 14. The Message translated into this. It says that the Word became flesh and then moved into the neighborhood. The Word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. If we're going to follow Jesus into mission, if we're going to participate in his work in our neighborhoods, in our suburbs, we must first embrace proximity. We must draw near to the people that God has sent us to. Is it school? Is it classmates? Is it your neighborhood? Is it your workplace? Where is it that God has placed you? And then what does it look like to begin to develop proximity? Proximity in frequency, proximity in relationally, proximity in geographic kind of terms, being near to them. What does it look like for us to draw near, to spend time with, to get closer to those in the places that God has sent us? And I will say this, that our effectiveness as Christ followers should always be expressed. Our effectiveness as Christ followers should always be expressed in proximity to those who are not yet Christ followers, to those that have not been set free or redeemed. That if we don't have this, we're missing something. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. I had another neighbor friend, and he is not yet a Christ follower as well. He is certainly on the journey. He's on the path. He's moving in that direction, but he's not there yet. He made one comment. He said, Ryan, why is it that these Christian folk, these religious folk, why is it that they are always inviting me into their world? Why is it that they're always asking me to come to their events, to come to their services, to come to their things, whatever it might be? He says, but not yet has one. And he said, you on the other hand, yeah, great, whatever. And I said, well, not a couple years ago. I was that guy. But he said, not yet has one stepped into my world. It's easy to invite somebody to our world. It's easy to invite people to come. It's a little bit harder. It takes a little bit more time. It takes a little bit more relational energy to step into their world. If we're going to follow Jesus, we must embrace proximity. We must start getting to know people. We must start eating with people. We must start hanging out with people. We must start being with. And I love the fact that Christmas is more than just this baby Jesus. It's more than Jesus coming to earth, but it's something much bigger, something much more huge. But Christmas is this wonderful illustration of Jesus leaving a place of comfort by his Father's side in the realm in which God's reign and rule is made known completely. And he left it to draw near to those whom he would save, with those that have value, to those that he created, to those that were nothing like him. And he drew near to them. He took a big old step out of heaven and came near. I want to say, if we're going to follow Jesus, we've got to start with proximity. I think the second thing is that we've got to move towards presence. Having a presence. What do you think presence is? What comes to mind? Say it a little louder. Availability. That's a great one. Anything else? Attention, being there. And I think those are fantastic. I think you guys are dead on. I think being present means showing up and not just drawing near, but being part of. Not just getting near to someone's life, but being part of their life. Knowing their story, being part of their story, engaging in relationship. I love, I'll read you another quote that one author wrote. It says this. It says, part of living like Jesus will mean taking a given culture or people group seriously and deeply investing in them. We need to take significant time to understand their history, their stories, their heroes, their books, and so on, in order to get their take on things. It is about immersing ourselves into their lives. When we identify with people, we take their culture and their concerns to heart. When we're present with people, we take the place in which you've been sent, and we begin to take those people's concerns to heart. That's what Jesus did he not? He moved into the world, and not only did he draw near in space, but he began to live amongst people, to take their concerns and their life, their worries, their struggles to heart. And I would say, I think the biggest piece of this is listening. We don't listen enough. It's so like us to want to come and want to talk. But we need to listen. The inventor of the stethoscope, he was quoted for saying, if you listen to people, they'll tell you how to heal them. I would say if you listen to people, you'll begin to hear what good news is for them. Because people don't just need to hear us talk about the kingdom, about the reign and rule of God. Yes, it's necessary to proclaim it. It's necessary to talk about it. But they need to hear and they need to see us demonstrate it. About a month ago, my wife leads a group of middle school girls from our neighborhood in this kind of just a weekly gathering, Bible study. And one of the dads came to pick up his daughter about a month ago from this group. And him and his family have only been in the neighborhood for about a year. They moved here for work from up north. And he had just gotten a promotion at his job here locally. And he came in and he was picking up his daughter. It was about 7:30 and he was with his wife. And you could just see the look on his face, and he was just exhausted. He is worn out. He had been in this new kind of job position for about 2 or 3 weeks, and he had been working 12 to 14-hour days. And you could tell that it had taken a toll on him. And so I asked him, I said, man, how are you doing? I said, you look wiped. And he says, well, I am. He said, this new job promotion, it's killing me. It's wearing me out. It's just a lot. And he said, and, man, it is not going well. And he was kind of pointing or signaling to his wife, we're the missus, because I haven't been home. And then on the weekends, I'm working to catch up from the midweek. I said, man. I said, is there anything that we can do for you? And I kind of had an idea. I was like, man, could we watch your kids for you one night? And he's like, oh, no, don't worry about it. I was like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah, that's fine. So he left, got his daughter, him and his wife walked out. Him and his family are not yet Christ followers. I've gotten out of the habit of saying far from God, because nobody's really far from God. But people that are not yet, so I say not yet, Christ followers. And I walk in and I talk to my wife and I said, yeah, he was telling me about this and about how he's not doing great with his wife and he's tired and burnt out. And I love my wife because she knows how to speak truth, and she helps me figure out what this thing looks like called following Jesus. And she said, well, what did you tell him? And I said, well, we could watch his kids for him. He's like, no. She looked at me and she says, Ryan, that's the problem. If we know what he needs, if we've listened to the Spirit, and listened to him, we don't need to just offer, we need to do. How many times do we use it as a cop-out? Oh, just let me know if I can do anything for you. I mean, we use it all the time. We've probably seen 100 people this morning and said, hey, I'm sorry that's happened. If I can do anything for you, let me know. I mean, yeah. But rather, if we know this, if we're listening to the Spirit and we hear the situation and hear the problem, we shouldn't wait around and just see if they'll call us. We should act. We should obey. We should do what we already know is the good thing to do. And so my wife said, Ryan, you need to call him back and you need to, or text him and tell him we are watching his kids this weekend. And so to confirm, she also texted the wife and said, hey, we're watching the kids this weekend. So in fact, they have 2 young girls, and they came over. They ended up not just coming over for the evening, but they ended up spending the night. The husband and wife got to go out, and they had a date, and they spent time together. He texted me in the middle of the night, and he said, man, I like my wife. I said, that's fantastic. Woohoo! He came over the next morning. Our faith community was meeting in our home, our missional community, faith community, church, whatever you want to call it. And he had come to pick up his daughters. And we were walking out. And he said, Ryan, I got to tell you, thank you. You have no idea what this meant to me. He said, this is the first time that somebody has really ever heard me and listened to me and helped out. He says, we've never had friends like that. That's not to say, look at us. I'm saying, what a shame that nobody has ever come alongside him and do that. And who are supposed to be the good news people? That's that word evangelical. It's not supposed to mean those that are gun-toting, vote Republican. hate everybody. That's not what the word means. It's supposed to be good news. If you want to learn how to minister and to bless those within your neighborhood, we've got to take time to draw near to them relationally, not as projects, not just to invite them to church, not as a means to the end. In fact, I would say put off, hey, do you want to come to my church, for as long as possible. It's great to get them into a faith community, yes, but they don't need whoever's here on stage to tell them about Jesus. They need you to do it. You're their neighbor, not this guy, whoever's up here, not this girl, whatever. They need you. So put it off. It's not about growing this place. It's not about getting this place bigger. It's about being the presence of Jesus in the place in which God has sent us. So we've got to draw near. And then once we've drawn near, we've got to take considerable amounts of time to listen. Just to shut up and listen and ask good questions. And then as we do this, we can begin to understand what good news is for them. For our neighbors, it was somebody to watch their kids because their marriage was kind of in a tough time. It was just coming alongside them and letting them know that they have friends that are going to be there to help them and walk with them. That's what they needed. That was good news. Yeah, I could have told them all about Jesus. I could have said, here's the 4 spiritual laws, blah, 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 blah. But he didn't need that. He needed someone to listen. I love the story of Jesus when he comes in and he heals the blind man, and he comes up to the blind man and he says, what can I do for you? It's like, hello, I'm blind. Jesus didn't assume. He didn't assume. Remember what they say about assuming? It makes out of you and me. We don't need to assume. We need to listen and hear and listen to the Spirit. And then we don't wait around. We act and we come alongside Him. I think the third thing, and I'll close up here in just a moment, is powerlessness. If we're going to follow Jesus into the neighborhood, into the suburbs, if we're going to join Him in His redeeming work, we're going to participate in mission, we've got to begin to develop a posture of powerlessness. It's what Jesus did. You think about the life of Jesus and all of the times that He could exert His power in the desert, the temptation of Satan, throughout His whole entire life. They didn't have any, He didn't have a place to sleep when He was in His last 3 years of His life. The foxes may have holes, the birds may have nests, but the Son of Man has no place. I'm pretty sure He could have been, boom, a house created, a bed, nothing. Standing in front of Pontius Pilate, He didn't say a word. He submitted Himself to others. He had a posture of humility, a posture of grace, a posture of love, a posture of seeing other people more important and more valuable than himself. If we're going to follow Jesus, we have got to begin seeing other people as more valuable than ourselves. Honestly, about probably 3 or 4 years ago, I may not have come out and said it, but I thought it and I acted on it, was that for me, the only people that could bring me value were people that were older than me and that had been a Christian longer than me. And if you weren't one of those, sorry, there was not a lot you could bring to my life. And I had to confess that and repent of that. Because that is not of the character and nature of Jesus. We've got to begin to see our neighborhood not as a project, but as a group of people to share life with, that they can bring value to our life just as much as we can bring value to theirs. Regardless of what they look like, their history, their habits, their sexual orientation, their hang-ups, whatever. We've got to begin looking at the world, not as a group of people that we need to fix, but as a group of people that we can share life with and allow one another to rub off on. That's what Jesus did. He took a guy like Matthew and he said, hey, Matthew, I don't really care about all the stuff you've been involved in, whatever. I see potential in you and I see value in you, and I want to share some life with you. Was Matthew a Christ follower yet? Would people call Matthew a Christian at that moment? No. What about 1 year into it? Would you call him a Christian? Probably not. 2? No. 3? It's questionable. How do I know that? Because they all deserted him while he was there hanging on the cross. But yet Jesus saw these disciples as men of value and worth. When the world looked down on them and said, you've got issues and you've got problems and you've got hang-ups, you're not holy enough, you don't look the part, you don't dress the part, sorry. But what if we took time to allow others to help us? What if we looked as our neighborhood as this community of resources that we can push into and learn from? It's funny, this is just a random thought. How many times did Jesus, in all of his parables, talk about carpentry? None. I don't remember one parable which Jesus talked about carpentry. But they were about law, and they were about finance, and they were about the political system, and they were about doctors and shepherds and farmers. How in the world do you think Jesus knew all this information? Did God put a little memory chip? Oh yeah, I know you're going to be fully human, but let me put a little memory chip to let you know how things work. No. For the first 30 years of his life, he spent time in his community learning from the people in his neighborhood, sharing life with the people in his neighborhood. Learning from the farmers, learning from the lawyers, learning from the doctors, learning from the shepherds. Because he shared life with. And I'll just say the last thing, if we're going to follow Jesus, we've got to draw near, we've got to listen, we've got to have a posture of I'm not better than you. And far too long, the church has had that posture. Jesus says, I'm sending you out like sheep amongst wolves. Not lion amongst wolves, not bears amongst wolves, but sheep. I'm sending you out as the one that is the least. And we've got to begin to learn how to proclaim. Proclaim the good news. That seems like a given one. It's not just demonstration of good news, but it's the announcement of good news. But we've got to do it in a way that makes sense. There's a great quote, and I could try to tell you it better, and it would take about 5 minutes longer. So I'm just going to read it, all right? That I love and that has been incredibly impactful as I think about how do we proclaim the good news? And then we'll close. Part of the problem with evangelism is many Christians feel they need to get the whole gospel out in one conversation. The reason for this is that many Christians are only in a position to evangelize strangers because all of their friends are Christians. When the only evangelism we do is with strangers on airplanes or at dinner parties or business conferences, we feel this understandable pressure to get all the bases covered because this might be the only opportunity we or they get. Evangelizing friends and neighbors gradually, relationally, over an extended period of time means that the breadth and the beauty of the gospel can be expressed without the one-off pitch. When we understand what it is to be truly missional, incarnated, like Jesus, deeply embedded within a local community, we will find that evangelism is best done slowly, deliberately, in the context of a loving community. It takes time and multiple engagements. It requires the unbeliever to observe our lifestyle, to see our demonstration of the reign and rule of God. They must test our values, enjoy our hospitality, and it must occur in a communal activity, not as a solo venture. Unbelievers must see the nature and quality of the embodied gospel in a community. And all the while, conversations, questions, debates, discussions, and even questions can occur where we can verbally express our devotion to the reign and rule of God through Christ. No more billboards, no more television commercials, no more unsolicited mail. If evangelism is like a meal, think of it as being prepared in a slow cooker and served over a long night around a large table. It can't be microwaved, and it can't be takeout. Now, doesn't that seem to make a whole lot more sense? I don't know about you, but it does to me. I'm going to ask the band to come up, and I want to close us in a word of prayer and send you off. And as I do that, I want to just make one note real quick to remind you of something as you go. I would encourage you, you can move that. I'm sorry. I know that's completely in your way. Is that when Jesus sent out the 72, it's in Luke chapter 10. You can go home and read it. And he sends them out 2 by 2 into all kind of the areas surrounding. And he told them something. He said, as you go, and as you go throughout all of these communities, I want you to proclaim the kingdom has come. The kingdom is near to them. It's not something far off. They no longer have to travel to the temple, but it's right there with them. And he said, oh, by the way, I want you to go, and I don't want you to take anything with you. Y'all remember that passage? I always wondered why he told him not to take anything with him. It makes a lot of sense, to be honest with you. Take an extra pair of shoes, another cloak in case one gets sweaty or cold or whatever, who knows. But he says, don't take anything with you. Don't take any money. Don't take another cloak. Don't take another pair of sandals. Go empty-handed into the communities in which I am sending you. And I've always wondered that until recently, and I began to realize and understand that when the people of Jesus' day were going to go to the Temple Mount to worship Yahweh, the rules for going to the Temple Mount, the rules for going to worship Yahweh in the temple, in the church building, was, hey, when you go to worship, you're not supposed to take anything with you. You're not supposed to take a pair of sandals. You're not supposed to take an extra cloak, and you're not even supposed to take a money bag. You are to go worship empty-handed. Jesus is saying, you want worship? I'll give you worship. Your worship will not be in going to the temple. Your worship will be living as the sent people of God, because my kingdom is not over there. It's where you already live. It's in the people, it's in the places, it's in the alleys, it's in the suburbs where you live. Now, I want you to live as a sent person. Now, that is worship. It used to be you go to the temple, you sing some songs, you go empty-handed. Not anymore. It's you being the hands and the feet of Jesus in the places you live. You are now the sent ones, the anointed ones. You are the ordained ones. There is no professional, ordinary divide. Each of you, each of us are the sent people in the places we live. And God wants to use you, and he wants you to join him. And you know what? The abundant life that you want and that God promises is dependent upon it. God, thank you for today. Thank you for allowing each of us grace. God, thank you for radically changing my life a few years ago. God, it is only by your grace that any of us are here today where we're at. And God, I want so desperately for the people, for your people, to realize that they can take part in your mission. That it's no longer the clergy, it's no longer the professional, it was never even meant to be that. But it was for the people of God, it was for the sent ones, it was for the church. We are the church, we are the ones, we are the good news people, and that we can take part in your mission, that we can come alongside you and begin to experience the life that you promised. God, will you excite us and empower us, give us license to live on mission in the places you placed us. Yes, we can go across borders and we can travel out of state, and all of those things are wonderful and necessary, but we can also go home to our street, our apartment complex. We can get up and go to work tomorrow morning, and we can announce and demonstrate what your kingdom looks like. God, we love you, and we thank you.